What is up, my Squirtleites? It is I, your king. For a while now, I've been trying to figure out a way to discuss the games I've been playing throughout the course of my backlog project. Twitter just doesn't do the discussion justice, but as I've said in the past, I don't want to extensively cover anything unless it's something truly remarkable. Of course, games aren't remarkable very often, so I need some other way to cover all of the in-betweeners. So I've decided to make a series of quick reviews for those, where I take 3 games an episode and just kind of go over them in about 2 to 4 minutes, and give them a quick score at the end so I can get my thoughts out there. It's better than Twitter, and I also don't have a lot of time to make these videos anything crazy. On top of that, not every single game that I cover in this series is going to be something that I finished. There are definitely going to be games that I run into that I just can't bring myself to finish, and I feel like it's best if I take the time here and explain why. Now that said, I just want to get my scoring system clear real quick so you understand that unlike your average gaming outlet, when I give something a 6 or a 7, that doesn't mean I hated it. I like to think that my scoring system actually makes sense, but it goes something like this. 1 is garbage, 2 is awful, 3 is bad, 4 is meh, 5 is okay, 6 is alright, 7 is good, 8 is great, 9 is amazing, and 10 is a masterpiece. Now without any further ado, let's get into the reviews. The first game of 2021 that I beat was Captain Toad Treasure Tracker for the Nintendo Switch. This is a very charming and simple puzzle platformer that more heavily leans on the puzzle aspect than the platforming aspect. The premise is incredibly simple to pick up on, even to those who never got to experience this gameplay as bonus levels in Super Mario 3D World. The entire game is awash with the charm that's kept Nintendo first-party games so persistently endearing all these years later, and while it might be a very simple and easy game, that does not at all mean it isn't fun. Nearly every single stage in this game tries to do something new with the limited concepts they have, and with how bite-sized these stages are, it's a constantly refreshing experience that never outstays its welcome. That's not to say every single one is a winner, but most of them are. It's just a really cute and easily lovable game. Now that being said, there are a couple of things that could be turnoffs to some. The biggest one that I can think of being the price point to content relationship. This game does a lot with its premise, but it is still a relatively short game, being as low as 3 to 4 hours if you really rush through it, and maybe 8 to 10 at the most if you try to fully 100% it. And with this normally being a $40 game, it's not terrible, but I could still see that being too steep for some. So it might be good to wait for this game to go on sale. The difficulty also just really isn't an issue whatsoever, but I think it's fair to say that if you're going into this game, the box art alone should tell you that there isn't going to be much in the way of a challenge. And don't fool yourself into thinking you'll find one. That isn't the point. Not every game has to be hard to be fun, and I think this is a perfect example of that. In all honesty, the worst compliment that I could give Captain Toad is that it's like some of the best games the mobile market has to offer, but on a much bigger scale and budget. It's very simple, it's not really taxing, but it does just enough that it requires your full attention. And overall, it's just a good, interesting, and enjoyable time. And in a game industry absolutely full of bloated garbage as its featured content year in and year out, something like this can be easily considered a gem. So Captain Toad Treasure Tracker gets a 7.5 out of 10 from me. The second game of 2021 that I beat was Human Fall Flat, a multi-platform game that I experienced personally on the Xbox One. This is another puzzle platformer game, although the driving force behind everything that makes and breaks this game is the physics. It's all about controlling these incredibly awkward characters and making them do the things you want them to do, stumbling your way to the end of every stage. Now, as someone who really values good control in video games, this already sounds like a recipe for disaster, but what makes Human Fall Flat work is a number of things. The first of these is that the controls aren't actually bad. They work exactly as intended, it's just manipulating them that's a challenge you eventually have to get good at. They're not unresponsive or misinformative, they're just tricky by design. Because the second thing that makes this game work is that it would be an absolute cakewalk otherwise. The puzzles that permeate this game are a complete no-brainer, and if it weren't for the control scheme paired with the physics engine, you could breeze through this game in a couple of hours. But what makes it work is that awkwardness in tandem. These seemingly simple tasks become all the more challenging because of how little control you have. It's like the same concept as a 3-legged race, you know, where you tie your leg to another person's and you have to work together to step in time to win the race. Yeah, this whole game is basically that, except the person you're tied to is your own little squishy buddy that you're controlling. But to top it all off, what really makes this game work is the cooperative multiplayer element. Honestly, if I hadn't played through this game with a friend, I probably would have been bored to tears or just frustrated. But the natural humorous element that the game offers, on top of this tug-of-war of compromise you have to play with your teammate, really brings this game to another level, and I have to commend it for that. Not a lot of physics-based silly games appeal to me very much, but this one bucked that trend pretty well. Now that being said, I have to be fair to the people that may not have the opportunity to play this with someone. And while I probably just flat out wouldn't recommend it to those people, I think there's still some substance you can get out of it. It's just not as good. This is not really much of a single-player game in my opinion, even though it's very possible and accessible to play it alone. If I were rating this game based on that, I'd probably give it a 4 or a 5. But because I consider the cooperative aspect of the game so important to its design, I feel much better giving Human Fall Flat a 7 out of 10. The third game of 2021 that I beat was Medal of Honor Vanguard for the PlayStation 2. Growing up, I played all of the other PlayStation 2 Medal of Honor games to absolute death, and for some reason, I just never got around to playing this one. I can't exactly put a finger on why, but I just never heard much about it when games like Rising Sun and Frontline were constantly praised by my friends. It just kind of flew under the radar, but after finally getting around to playing it, I completely understand why. This game sucks. What's so interesting about it too is that from the moment I started playing it, I really felt as though I was about to just get more of European Assault, which happens to be my favorite entry in the entire series. It had a very similar style to it with an amazing soundtrack, once again being helmed by none other than Michael Giacchino of all people. And right off the bat, it puts you in a very familiar setting from the series of going building to building and very cleverly using your cover. Unfortunately, what I would find out pretty quickly is that this really is the entire game, and I'm not even kidding. The level design in this game is just awful. No matter the aesthetics of the level, everything is a glorified hallway, something even Call of Duty wouldn't do as a series for at least a few more years. It has a lot of half-baked implementations of ideas that would later become staples for the FPS genre, such as a sprint feature and a health regen system when behind cover, but like I said, it's half-baked. The sprint meter runs out in less than 2 seconds. The health regen is fine, but your health is so unforgivingly small that you often spend more time in cover just waiting than you do actually shooting at things. The gunplay also just feels worse than European Assault, which, may I point out, is the older game? Vanguard just feels trapped between the PlayStation 2 and PlayStation 3 era of first-person shooters, the former of which kind of culminated in the last days of the old FPS, a bygone era at this point, while the latter was a clunky exodus into the future we have now. Except this game is somehow even clunkier. It does nothing right by either era of FPS, and it just falls flat on its face. It's not really a broken mess per se, but that honestly would have made for a more entertaining game than what we got, because this was just boring. The best thing I can say about it is, as was tradition with the series, the musical score is pretty fantastic, but otherwise I'd say definitely avoid Medal of Honor Vanguard if you plan on looking into the series, and it's getting a 2 out of 10 from me. I originally gave it a 3 on Twitter, but I've since downgraded it to a 2, and that's where I'm staying. This game sucks. Alright, let me know what you guys think on this. I know it was kind of quick, just rapid firing through these games. I've got another episode at least to come here pretty darn soon if you guys like this one, and hopefully more in the future when I can actually get back to tackling this backlog with some sort of consistency. Thank you all so very much for watching, and I will see you all in the next one.